We're going to read about the San Francisco earthquake. Yesterday we learned about San Francisco becoming a city, how it started off as a small town along the San Francisco Bay, along the Pacific Ocean, and how it's on the western coast of the United States. And it started off as a small community. It started off as small land, but we also learned that people found gold in that area as well. Gold was found east of San Francisco, and people traveled to that area because they wanted to find gold. And these people were called miners. They traveled, and these people needed things, right? They needed stores and houses, places to sleep, and places to eat. So San Francisco grew, right? We learned about that. We also learned that a lot of the buildings and the houses were built of wood, right? And we know that sometimes that can cause fire because they were using oil and gas lamps to see at night. And this was a long time ago, and we don't use those types of things to see at night, but they did. And that could start a fire pretty easily, and it did, unfortunately, sometimes. They also experienced something else at this time, and that was an earthquake. And earthquakes happen a lot on like the western part of the United States, in California. That does happen sometimes. So let's read about the San Francisco earthquake. And in 1906, San Francisco was a large city. Then a terrible earthquake happened. We know earthquake is an important word because it's bolded, it's a different color. An earthquake makes the ground shake. Maybe you remember learning about an earthquake before. Many buildings fell. Others caught on fire and burned. Firefighters could not save them all. Fire spread all over the city. The docks caught on fire too. Many people lost their homes. Now, we read about docks because we saw that San Francisco was part of like the San Francisco Bay, and tons of ships docked there because people brought in goods from all over, and they would dock there and unload the goods from the ships. So after the earthquake, many people lived in tents in the city parks. They were afraid to go near the rest of the buildings. They stood in long lines to get food and water. After a while, people started to rebuild their homes and stores. Soon, San Francisco was growing again. So they experienced something that was not great, right? Something that was pretty traumatic to them. But they decided that they would, after a while, start to rebuild their homes and their stores and regrow the city of San Francisco. And up top, we can see a little bit of a timeline of the San Francisco earthquake. We can see a little bit of a timeline when the earth shook and when fire started to blaze, and it only happened over a couple of days. And we can see this zoomed in. A timeline of the San Francisco earthquake in 1906. So on Wednesday, the earth shook. Thursday and Friday, the fires blazed. So give yourself a little thumb up if you've ever heard of a timeline before. Timelines show when things happen. And we have heard of and actually talked of the word before, timeline, when we read our book Helen Keller. Because when we read the biography Helen Keller and learned about her life, it was told in a certain order. And when people talk about timelines, they talk about timelines in the order that things happen, from beginning to end. And timelines show when things happen. They can show things that happened over many years. They can show things that happened over less time, too. So let's look at this timeline above. It tells the story of the San Francisco earthquake. Many people still think about this big event. So it goes from Wednesday, we already saw Thursday and Friday. Now we see Saturday and Sunday. This is just 5 days. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday looks pretty scary. Earth shook, fires blazed, and on Saturday, look what happens. the docks are saved. And on Sunday, look what it says. The city will rebuild. So over 5 days, they experienced something scary. And they decided to rebuild their city. They saved their docks and they wanted to rebuild their city. Saving the docks is really important, especially for such a large city like San Francisco, because a lot of the things that people needed were brought in on the ships, and people docked their ships right there in the bay in San Francisco. And they knew that they needed to rebuild this city that they loved. So many people had moved to that area. Here's just a little bit of a close-up picture of the timeline. Remember, it's told in order. And some people tell timelines and show timelines of their life or another person's life, and that can happen over years. But you can also show a timeline of an event, and that might happen over just a couple days. This was an important event that happened, and we're showing it just over 5 days. The San Francisco earthquake. From Wednesday, the earth shaking, 5 days later, they're starting to rebuild the city. So this is a timeline, but we're showing something that happened over less time too. So San Francisco grew from a small town into a big city. People built docks and buildings. Miners came to search for gold, and more stores opened. In 1906, an earthquake and fires almost destroyed the city. Later, people built the city back up again. That is an incredible story for a town that was so small in the beginning. What looked like just small, quiet farmland, not many people around, to such a large city today. Maybe you will go visit it. Mrs. Simon went to visit San Francisco a few years ago. She went to visit in 2017. It's a huge city. There's so much to see and so much to do. Right on the water, you can cross another bridge, the Golden Gate Bridge, while you're over there. But to be honest with you, I think that the Mackinac Bridge was much more impressive. I thought the Mackinac Bridge was much cooler in person. So maybe you will go see San Francisco one day, or even Los Angeles. But we have seen them go from these small towns on the bay or the ocean on the west coast of the United States to these large cities.